The only silence you ever get in a U-boat is a lie. Even here, 100 meters deep in the black heart of the North Atlantic, running on the electric motors, there is no true quiet. There is the whisper of the ventilation, the soft hum of the gyros, the creak of a bulkhead settling. To a mechanic like me, it's a language. It's the boat breathing. I knew every cough, every sigh of U-552. She was my machine. I could tell you the pressure in her veins and the rhythm of her iron heart just by the feel of the deck plates beneath my boots. And that night her breathing was shallow, tense. We were hunting. The air was thick enough to chew, a familiar stew of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and cooking cabbage that clung to your clothes and lived in your throat. We had been trailing convoy SC-107 for 2 days. A fat, slow beast of a convoy, lumbering towards England. For us, it was a feast laid out on a dark cloth. Up in the control room, Captain Lieutenant Top would be at the periscope, a sliver of his eye pressed to the lens, painting a picture of the world above from the brief glimpses he stole from the waves. Down here in the engine room, my world was dials and gauges, the smell of hot oil, and the deep, resonant thrum of the diesels when we ran on the surface. But now it was the electric hum, the sound of the predator stalking its prey. The order came down the chain of command, a series of clipped professional shouts that echoed through the steel tube. Battle stations, torpedo room, stand by. The tension in the air solidified. Men moved with a practiced economy, no wasted motion. The low hum of the boat seemed to drop an octave, a growl building in its chest. I ran a final check on my gauges, my hands gliding over the familiar brass and steel. Everything was in the green, perfect. A well-oiled machine ready to do its work. That was my pride, not the sinking of ships, but the perfection of the machine that did it. Then came the shudder. A deep, violent tremor that ran through the keel, up the walls, and into the soles of my feet. A sound followed a half-second later, a dull, watery concussion. Then another. Our eels had found their targets. A grim satisfaction settled in the compartment. A job done. We had drawn blood, but any wolf knows that when you wound the flock, the shepherd comes running, and the shepherds of the Atlantic were getting better at their jobs. We went deep. Alarm. Tauchen, the call was sharp, urgent. The deck tilted steeply, and the groans of the boat changed as we plunged, seeking the cold, crushing safety of the depths. 200 meters. The pressure at that depth is immense. It transforms the boat from a vessel into a prisoner of the sea. Every rivet, every weld is under a strain that is hard to imagine. You feel it in your bones. The air gets thick, the temperature drops. The boat starts to speak a new language now, the language of pain. Then we heard it, the sound every U-boat man dreads more than death itself. Ping, a high, clear, metallic note that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't just a sound, it was a violation. It sliced through the hull, through the air, through our bodies, a needle of sound searching for us in the dark. Ping, it was the sound of an enemy destroyer's ASDIC. They were listening, they were hunting us. The hunter was now the hare. Captain Lieutenant Top's voice over the speaker was impossibly calm. Silent running, rigged for depth charges. The main lights were killed, plunging us into the blood-red gloom of the emergency lighting. Men braced themselves, grabbing onto pipes, ladders, anything solid. The cheerful hum of the machines died, and a new silence took its place. A heavy, listening silence. We were a steel ghost, holding our breath, praying the giant searching for us would pass by. Ping, closer this time. We were all statues, frozen in grim tableaus. My hand rested on a cooling manifold, and I could feel the vibration of that sound through the very bones of the boat. Ping, ping, right above us. I didn't have time to brace. The world exploded. It wasn't a sound, it was a physical blow. The entire U-boat was lifted and slammed sideways by a fist of pure force. I was thrown from my feet, my head cracking against a valve wheel. The deck plates buckled and rang like a colossal bell. Light bulbs shattered, showering us with fine glass dust. Men screamed. The air filled with the sharp, acrid smell of ozone from fried electrical circuits. Before the ringing in my ears could subside, the next one hit. Closer. The boat screamed, a true, metallic scream of tortured steel. This was my fear, not the quick death of an explosion, but this. The slow, agonizing sound of our world being torn apart. The groaning of the pressure hull is the sound of your own coffin lid being nailed shut, one rivet at a time. Another blast, this one so close it felt like it was inside the compartment with us. The lights flickered and died completely, leaving us in absolute, terrifying blackness. The red emergency light sputtered back to life, casting long, dancing shadows that made monsters of men and machines. A torrent of cork insulation rained down from the overhead, and then I heard a new sound, a sound that was worse than the explosions, a high-pitched, relentless hiss. It was the sound of the Atlantic Ocean, the monster we lived in, trying to force its way inside. Damage report, the shout came from the control room, tinny and distant. Flooding, after compartment. The words, raw with panic, came from a young machinist near me. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the chaos. I saw it immediately. A jet of seawater, white and furious in the dim light, was spraying from a ruptured seawater pump casing. It wasn't a drip, it was a torrent. It was hitting the hot engine block, filling the air with scalding steam. The water on the deck was already over my ankles, frigid and numbing. The boat was listing. We were taking on water fast. At this depth, a breach like that, we had minutes, maybe less. The pump was critical. It cooled the engines, but more importantly, its failure meant a direct, high-pressure line from the ocean into our boat. Panic is a useless thing for a mechanic. A machine doesn't care if you're afraid. It only cares if you know how to fix it. My mind went cold and clear, the chaos fading into a single, sharp point of focus, the ruptured pump. The blasts continued to rock us, each one a hammer blow trying to break my concentration. The water was rising, swirling with oil and filth. I waded towards the pump, my tools already in hand. The roar of the water was deafening, the pressure behind it immense. My flashlight beam illuminated the fracture, a jagged crack in the cast iron housing, pulsing with every wave of pressure from the depth charges. No patch would hold. We couldn't shut off the main sea valve without catastrophic consequences for the boat's balance and systems. It needed to be sealed now. "Richter, what are you doing? Get out," someone yelled. I ignored them. My world had shrunk to this single, failing piece of machinery. My hands, numb with cold, fumbled with a wrench. There was no time for a proper repair, no time to weld or craft a new part. I needed to improvise. My eyes scanned the compartment, lit by the violent, intermittent flashes of explosions outside the hull. Spare gaskets, a metal plate, a length of pipe, nothing would work. The pressure was too high. It would blow any simple patch to pieces. The boat lurched again, throwing me against the bulkhead. The water was at my knees now. I could feel the trim of the boat shifting dangerously. We were getting heavier, sinking. Sinking meant more pressure. More pressure meant the hull would fail. The cycle of our death was already in motion. Then my hand touched my waist, my belt. Thick, sturdy leather. It was a stupid idea, an act of pure desperation. But it was all I had. I ripped it from my trousers, my fingers clumsy and shaking. I found a small, flat piece of scrap steel on the deck, a remnant of some earlier repair. Using a heavy spanner, I hammered it flat, trying to shape it over the curve of the pump housing. The noise was incredible, the hiss of the water, the clang of my hammer, the apocalyptic thunder of the depth charges. It was the sound of the world ending. I wedged the steel plate over the main fracture. I looped my belt around the entire pump casing, over the plate, pulling it with all my strength. The leather was slick with oil and water. My fingers were losing all feeling. I had to create a tourniquet. I found a short steel rod and threaded it through the belt buckle. Then I began to twist. The leather groaned in protest, biting into the metal. I twisted until my knuckles were white, until my muscles screamed. The hissing spray lessened, turning from a torrent into a series of angry jets. It wasn't perfect, but it was less. It was something. I kept twisting. The boat felt like it was in the grip of a giant, being shaken apart. Another explosion right on top of us. The concussion was absolute. A wall of white noise and pure pressure hit me. My head felt like it had been split open. The world vanished into a silent, blinding flash. There was no pain. Just nothing, a great, silent void. When my senses returned, I was on my knees in the water, my hands still locked onto the rod. The world was muffled, as if I were listening to it through a thick wall. The roaring hiss from the pump was gone. In its place, only a few small, weeping trickles of water. My makeshift clamp was holding. The water on the deck had stopped rising. For a second I stared at my work, a piece of scrap metal and a common leather belt holding back the entire weight of the Atlantic Ocean. It was ugly, it was insane, but it was working. Faces peered at me through the gloom, their mouths moving, but I could hear nothing but a single, high-pitched, piercing tone. It was a sound that had been burned directly into my brain. The chief engineer was clapping me on the shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief and relief. Men were already starting the bilge pumps, their movements frantic, desperate. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. Someone helped me up, guiding me out of the flooding compartment. The great, violent shudders from the depth charges were becoming less frequent, more distant. They were losing us. We were escaping. We limped back to Lorient, a wounded wolf dragging itself home. The journey was a blur. The constant, screaming ring in my ears became my new companion, a permanent echo of the explosion that had saved us. It replaced the familiar hum of the machinery, the voices of my comrades. It was the new silence. When we finally surfaced, the clean, cold night air was the greatest thing I had ever tasted. I stood on the deck looking at the stars, and the only sound I could hear was that endless internal shriek. I had saved the boat. I had done my duty. But a part of me, the quiet, meticulous mechanic from Hamburg, was left behind in the darkness, 200 meters down. He died so that Gunther Richter, the man who could no longer hear the silence, could live. These memories are heavy, but they must be shared. Subscribe to ensure these stories are never forgotten.